glad that you're here with us today. So today's agenda for this webinar is we're going to talk a bit about grant basics. Then I'm going to introduce our distinguished panel, and we're going to discuss their perspectives on grants and obtaining grants and writing grants. And then we're going to briefly discuss some assistance that ECS can offer you when you are working on a grant. And we have a very diverse audience. Thank you to all those who completed our questionnaire. So we are going to try to answer all your questions. And so if you do have additional questions, please make sure to pop those in the chat for us. Basically, grants are an investment in your work within the community. It's a contract between the coalition and the funder to carry out the plan that you propose in your grant proposal. We are able to get lots of different grants from different agencies. There's grants from the government at all levels: federal, state, local, county, city. There's grants from private foundations, and then there's grants from corporations as well. When you're looking for grants, one way to look is to go to grants.gov for the many federal grants that are out there. There's also possibilities to look at the various agencies within your state: Health and Human Services, Agriculture. You can go to guidestar.org. If you're aware of private foundations that give money, including corporations that operate in your locale, you can go to their websites. State agencies, foundation libraries, and amazingly, foundation libraries tend to be at the main library in your community, but due to the pandemic, many of them have gone online. So services that weren't available in the past are now available at your office. You can also subscribe to different Grant Watch organizations where they will send you an email once a week that will provide you some opportunities that you can then go in and check on your own. Our panelists today are diverse. They come from 2 different states. They have a variety of different experiences. Our first one, Doug Bratton, is with Partners in Prevention. And I asked each of our panelists to share to give me their street cred regarding grants. And Doug has worked on about 50 grants. Those grants have brought $10 to $15 million to his organization. And as you can see, he's received a number of federal grants: DFC Mentoring, STOP Act, the SPIF grant. He's also received county level prevention grants. He's received state grants. He's received foundation grants, including the Salem Health and Wellness Foundation and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grants. Brenda Essler is with Empower Somerset, also in New Jersey. She's worked on 11 county, state, and federal grants in the past 10 years and has been awarded almost $11 million. Once again, she has also received DFC grants, federal grants, including STOP Act, and the SPIF grants. She's received several from New Jersey, including the County Council for Young Children, Family Success Center, Coordinated School Health, Prevention Education, and then she's received several from the county as well, including SBIRT and the OD Fatality Review. And our third panelist is Amy Masechko from Ohio. And she worked on 2 to 3 grants a year for 15 years. So she's worked on between 30 and 45 grants. She's been awarded in excess of $1.7 million. She has received grants from the Ohio Mental Health Association, that's OMHAS, their primary prevention grant. She's received a HRSA grant for rural opioid grant. She's received several grants from her community, United Way of Oxford, which is the city that her coalition is in, Butler County, United Way, Interact for Health Thriving Communities Grant, Oxford Community Foundation, and the Butler Rural Community Connection. So our panelists today have a variety of experience that, and we're just going to have a conversation here based on some of the questions you submitted and some of the questions that we discussed earlier. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to, I'll ask them to start with a question, and then we'll move on to the other panelists. So our first question, I'm going to start with Doug on this one because he's at the top of my screen, and then go to Brenda and Amy. What types of grants do you have the most experience with?
I'll lump a bunch under the umbrella of government grants. We've applied for county level, state level, federal grants. We've received funding at all of those levels, but they are and can be quite different in their requirements and their approach. And I have written foundation grants, but definitely many more state, county, and federal grants.
Brenda?
Similarly, government grants. Recently, federal has been the most frequent type of grant that we've had success with. Also state grants, and to a more limited extent, some county grants.
And Amy?
Yes, I'd say I have never been the lead on a federal grant. I've assisted with many of them in the writing process and the implementation, but so most of my experience is more at the state, regional, and local level, whether that's with United Ways, foundations, regional kind of health foundations as well.
And I'm going to go off the charts here for a moment and just ask Doug, Brenda, and Amy, when you choose your grants, you have a sweet, it seems like there's a sweet spot possibly with the types of grants that you write, that you get. Why do you tend to choose the grants that you're writing?
I'll say that first, you want to find grants that are aligned with your mission. I'm the executive director of a prevention organization, so substance use prevention funding tends to be the majority of what we apply for, and there's government support for that. And then I would also say, I think that, and I'm sure we'll all talk about this more later, building relationships with your funders is incredibly relevant to the success of your applications. So over time, when you as as an executive director or a grant writer or an organization build a relationship with certain funders, then that relationship helps open the door for more funding opportunities down the road. So our agency has had state level funding for probably about 30 years. So we have lots of relationships there. We've had to build the relationships more with federal funding and then the county level funding.
I'd say, if I could jump in to build on that, once you identify an opportunity that is a good fit with your mission, other practical things that I would weigh would be what is the amount of the award? How many awards are being given? Do I have enough time to write a good proposal, and do I have the correct elements in place? Those would just be a few other practical things to help me make the decision about whether or not to apply.
And I would probably echo a lot of what my fellow panelists have said in terms of, for us, it is very much about the relationship part. And as a small rural town in Ohio, we have cultivated and and been very intentional about cultivating relationships with some of our local funders that have seen the value of our work over time. And so that is just a wonderful opportunity to continue to build upon our success and our relationship with them as partners in the work.
Nice, nice. So our next question is, where do you find the best grant opportunities? And I'll start with Brenda and go up to Amy and then Doug.
I think some of the things that you outlined on your slide are great suggestions. If you can subscribe to receive updates from places like grants.gov or even something more local. For example, our county Department of Human Services has a subscription, and I receive every funding opportunity that comes along. Even if they don't apply or fit our organization, I can often forward them along to a partner. Word of mouth is great. The relationship, ties back into that. You'll find your networks in which you can share and find information. I'll leave some answers for others.
Okay. Amy?
I would say like e-newsletters that come from the organizations or the funders. So for us, our state agency of mental health and addiction services, they put out weekly a great newsletter where there's a lot of grant opportunities. Similarly, some of our regional foundation ones subscribing to their newsletter, and they put out every time there's a new RFP or opportunity available. So that tends to be where we go to look for those opportunities.
And I think Brenda and Amy covered so much here. I'll just add in that your current funders and your current partners in the community, it's why those relationships and your reputation are so important. If you've had a grant from a funder and you've done a fantastic job and exceeded your obligations on it, they're more likely to shoot you an email or give you a call and let you know there's another opportunity coming. If you are very collaborative and you work with other organizations and you do something that Brenda just mentioned, which is you come across a grant that might not be right for you, but might fit with somebody else, and you pass that along, that's likely to come back your way at some point. And those partners that you surround yourselves with, you'd be surprised how many opportunities they will bring to your attention. I'll say, I'm sure there will be time that, Mary Ann, you talk a little bit more about Epiphany Services, but absolutely one of, Epiphany as our evaluation partner, has brought multiple grants to our attention that we've applied for and received. So those relationships are really important.
Yes, and in our newsletter, we do put those out there, and that goes out every week as well. I just want to note that while this is a grant webinar, it seems like it could almost be a partner webinar, as all of you have stressed the importance of partnerships in developing your grant proposals and the importance of working with others. So we've already answered this one, so I'm trying to get beyond it and go to the next one, which is, tell me about a fundamental element of grant writing that you think is important that some others may overlook. And I'm going to start with Amy and go up to Brenda and then Doug.
I think one of the things that I have learned over time, especially, is even for the smaller grants, and especially with the larger grants, there's the importance of making that checklist, because there are so many little parts, and oftentimes you have to get documents from people about the fiscal sponsor, from your fiscal sponsor, or data from others, and you need to rely on other people to help you, so you need to give them that courtesy of not waiting till the last minute. So knowing upfront, combing through that grant, what are all the things I need, whether it's an attachment, whether it's a data set, whatever it is, because you really do need to rely on people, and it takes that team effort, and making sure that you're organized up front will be much appreciated by those folks that want to assist you, but may not be available right at the very last minute if that's what you're choosing to wait till.
I'll answer a little outside the box here and say self-care, because I know that when I am writing a grant, especially a large grant, that deadline becomes something in which my life sometimes can revolve around. Especially now we're working remotely. Take a break from the screen, take a walk, clear your mind, and put it aside for a moment. When you come back with a fresh perspective, it can make all the difference in moving forward.
Thank you. And Doug?
So I think Amy touched on some really important elements, like get organized at the beginning, review it with a fine-tooth comb, have a clear timeline and a plan, know who else you have to rely on, who can help you with the budget or getting letters of support or organizing required attachments, all of those things, which I rely on some of my colleagues' help with, so I can focus more on the writing. And when it comes to the writing, I think there are a lot of important fundamentals to be aware of when you go into writing any grant. And first and foremost, you want to make this super easy for your reviewer or your scorer, especially when it comes to like federal, state, other government grants. There's usually a team of reviewers who are given a rubric, and they're going to have that checklist of all the, the questions and sub-questions and how fully did you answer it. You don't want to write this wonderful 10, 20-page essay that they've got to figure out where you're answering what. You want to lay it out very much in line with the way that the questions are aligned. You want to bold and highlight key words that show and draw attention to those key words that you're letting the reviewers know that you've taken the time to make sure you answer every single thing and you answer it well. Just a couple other tips. Read not only the questions, but also ask yourself, what are the unwritten questions? If a funder asks you to explain challenges that you might have implementing the grant, you want to explain those challenges. You want to tell them how you're going to overcome those challenges and how that funding that they're giving you is helping you overcome those challenges, whether they ask for that or not. If they ask you what you plan to do, don't just tell them what you're going to do, but tell them how you're going to do it as well. Those things will really help strengthen your application. And the last thing is just to be able to be a good grant writer, you first have to be able to be a decent writer, and you want to pay attention to those writing elements. If it's not your strength, have partners who are good editors and proofreaders. If you submit a proposal that's filled with typos, that makes it very easy for a reviewer to say, okay, this isn't a very professional application, I'm not going to pay much attention to it. If it's really well organized, structured, doesn't have typos, clearly addresses the questions, and it flows well, all of these things will immediately give the reviewer the impression that you're really knowledgeable and you know what you're doing, and they want to pay attention, to all 10 or all 20 pages of your proposal.
Thank you. And I would just like to add that many of the grants ask similar questions. So I am a big fan of cutting, pasting, reviewing, and massaging. I don't need to write the same answer 15 different ways, but I do need to make sure it is appropriate for the grant that I'm writing. So just wanted to add that one.
Mary Ann, if I could just piggyback on that for a second. Mm-hmm. There are those sections. There's what's the need, what's your organizational history, all of those things that will pretty much be in any grant. But I think you're right. Well, it is good to have those basics, and it'll save you time to reuse. you also want to tweak it to the language and the need and the type of application that it is. So for example, while we're primarily a substance use prevention organization, we deal a lot with mental health and other adverse childhood experiences, other related, upstream elements and risk factors of substance use. So if I'm writing a grant around ACEs or around mental health, I am going to change in our organizational history to highlight those things that our organization has done that's very specific to that grant, not just we're a 30+ year substance use organization. I'm going to talk about the work that we've done around adverse childhood experiences or around mental health and make those specific adjustments.
And I think you bring up another good point, Doug, that you need to use the vocabulary of the grant. If you're talking about adverse childhood experiences, that's very different than underage drinking, and you need to use the appropriate vocabulary that your funder is expecting. All right, our next question is tell us about your typical grant writing process, including any tips you have to organize your proposal before writing. So your planning phase, and I'll start with Amy on this one.
Definitely, as we kind of reiterated before, one of the first things I would do is to go through the whole grant with, that fine-tooth comb and make a checklist, highlight like all of the must-haves, must-dos, and get myself that pre-planning that we spoke about. I think that is very, very critical. Using our existing logic models to kind of help the flow of it, and making sure that that is a tool that is used when you apply for grants. And then kind of to what Brenda was saying, I completely agree about, don't do that to yourself, that you're like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to pound it all out right now. No, that's not, you're not going to be at your best. Your application's probably not going to be at its best. So really kind of breaking it into chunks is helpful for me, and just kind of making sure that I know, okay, this week I'm focusing on this. If you have weeks in advance or a couple days or whatever, and be good to yourself and break it up into smaller portions.
Thank you. And Brenda?
So absolutely, you have to familiarize yourself with the entire application and find out if there are key elements that will make your efforts all for naught. You've got to make sure those are in place and you allow time to get them in place. For example, things like your SAM code or your DUNS number or your grants.gov, account status, those things need to be in place. And then things that take time, like getting letters back from partners if you need memorandums of agreement or letters of support.
You exhaust yourself or your team going after something like that when you truly don't have an appropriate amount of time. When we do our timeline, we always backtrack from the due date. So for example, if a grant is due on a Friday, we always have 48 hours prior to that is when we will upload, because pretty much all our applications are online now. And that's to give yourself a buffer in case there's a problem with the website or you need some TA, things like that. It's wonderful and really helpful if you can get that done 24 or 48 hours in advance at a minimum. We always try and get a really a very rough first draft done after a content outline, which is a whole other thing. Like, do a content outline first to organize your thoughts, then do a first draft. We generally try and have our first draft done quickly so that we can get it out to reviewers for feedback, even if it's really bad, like it's in a really rough state with a lot of fill in the blank spots and things like that. Getting an outside perspective will help you catch things that you're too in it writing it to miss. And then after giving a reviewer time to read it, then we do a full rewrite, have a second round of edits after that, and then finally a proofreader. So that really takes time. You have to have, if you want to use that process, you know, you have to be prepared to be done with at least a rough first draft 3-4 weeks out from the deadline. So knowing that when you plan your timeline, and sometimes that might give you, you know, 3 weeks to write that first narrative. Sometimes it might give you like 6 or 8 days. Those are very different timelines, and everybody has different resources at your disposal. You know, I've written grants where it was, you know, kind of just me, and I've written grants where I was like leading a team of 5 or 6 different people with different roles. I certainly prefer B over A, but not everybody is in an organization that will allow that. It can be done, but that more organized you get and the more realistic you are at the beginning with, do I have enough time to get this done? Because no one likes to, you know, put a ton of work on your staff or on yourself and then get to the end and know I've got no shot whatsoever in getting this proposal, or we didn't look at the, you know, updating our login in grants.gov, and now we did all this work and we can't even submit. Like, that's just a bad situation you don't want to find yourself in.
Yeah. And at the end of this, I'm going to speak a little bit about the ECS content outline that we provide for many grants and our support with proofreading, because I definitely, as a person who writes a lot, it all makes sense in my head, but then, you know, when other people read it, I'm missing key components. So the proofreader is such an important part of this process. Thank you. Those were all great tips. And our next question is about the relationships. At the beginning of this, many of you spoke about the partnerships you have with people that have supported you on the grants that you have received. So if we could talk just a little bit, and I could imagine this is in a completely different webinar because these relationships are so important. But if you could just take a minute and speak to those relationships, and I'm going to start with Brenda first here.
So I think that in my experience, certainly there have been times when I felt that our organization was the best positioned to apply for a certain opportunity because of the relationships that we have. And I think, you know, it plays into a few different areas. One is giving you access to the information that you need to demonstrate the need or how this proposed idea can effectively work. Letters of support, you know, proposing an idea. We've had grants that really hinged upon a partnership with another organization, and those relationships that you build over time are so important. Also, another thing I would add here is reciprocate. You know, when someone sends me, can you get me this letter of support by like 4 p.m., I always get it to them every time, because there's going to be a time when I'm going to need them to get back to me something with a quick turnaround. So once, you know, those things over time tend to flow, and those relationships really help in the grant writing process.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm going to ask Doug next, and then Amy.
Yeah, I can't stress enough the importance of that. You know, what Brenda said, you want to be there for everybody else. Like, you want to have the reputation of when somebody else needs a letter of support, when somebody else needs a partner to assist them on something, when somebody else like has a training that they're having a hard time recruiting for, you circulate their flyers and you try and make your staff available for it. You know, that comes back to you. You know, it's the old, you know, making deposits and withdrawals from the emotional bank account analogy. It's like, you don't want to be asking somebody else for favors that you haven't already contributed to. So I think that's really important. I think it even goes beyond that, like know your close relationships and your partners who are always there for you. This is probably a rare thing, but we've certainly had it happen where we found out there was a grant that we knew we would be great for and would probably get if we applied for it. And then we found out one of our key partners who had worked with us for many, many years already had that funding. And if we applied for it, we probably beat them out and take that away from them. And we chose not to apply, and that's not always easy to do, but it makes a big difference, because when somebody, that you have a relationship with who knows, that you could do a good job, doesn't back off if it's more in your wheelhouse, it can leave a bad taste in your mouth, and it can make you not want to collaborate with that organization as much anymore. We've certainly, unfortunately, experienced having broken relationships with an organization that did something like that. And in the world that we work in, the goal is to make a difference in the lives of others and to help people. So who wants to be in a in a position where you're fighting with somebody else with a similar mission as you? You want it's your reputation, those relationships that you build, the support that you give others when they need it, hopefully will come back to you when you need it from them.
And Amy?
Yeah, I definitely, it's all about relationships. Absolutely essential to the work that we do. As my fellow panelists just said, I guess the only other thing that I think I could add is, for example, we are not our own 501c3. So we have the school district as our fiscal agent. And I think that relationship is really critical as well. And one that, it's taken years. We've been with the district for years, but, when we initially approached the district about, would you serve in this capacity for our organization? We had been fostering and working and cultivating that trusting, sustained relationship. And they've been wonderful to us. But as a coalition, we need to make sure we are doing our due diligence and following all of their, protocols and their needs, making sure we demonstrate our appreciation and gratitude for the role that they're playing, because we wouldn't be able to receive grants if it were not for them serving in this role for us. So the relationship between us and our school district as our fiscal agent or sponsor is absolutely vital to our work.
And I would just like to add that when I've worked with partners, making it easy for the partner to support us was always helpful. Like if I needed a letter of support, I could draft a good example for them that would make it easy for them to turn around in a short amount of time. I want my partners to have it easy in some respects, because I know sometimes I'm gonna need something from them that won't be as easy. So, and like I said, partnerships are so key. They take time, energy, and effort, and that could be an entirely different webinar. But today we're focusing on grants, and so we just gave that a short amount of time. Our next question is, what is one thing you wish someone would have told you before you wrote a grant that you did not get? And I know that many of you have already mentioned you wished you would have, I appreciate the checklist that you're talking about, because I think that takes away so many of those simple things that we might overlook. So this might be something bigger. And we'll start with Doug and go to Brenda and Amy.
So I think a big thing is that most grants, you'll have more than one opportunity to write them. So if you write a grant the first time and you don't get the score that you want, especially in government grants, you're usually going to get scoring feedback, which is really helpful. So it's okay to write a grant knowing that you might not get it this time because you might the next time. One of the tips I think is really helpful to know is that winning grant proposals, at least in New Jersey, I think this is federally, are now a matter of public record because they're funded. So you can use OPRA, which is the Open Public Records Act, to get a copy if you apply for a grant and you didn't get it, and you didn't get a lot of clear feedback, you can actually OPRA request, and I've done this, a copy of the winning proposal to see what somebody else wrote. I would say, don't forget that if you've built those relationships that we keep talking about, that you can reach out and ask for a partner for help who's been successful in getting a grant that maybe you're applying for the first time or that you didn't get. I did that once with Brenda. We applied for a federal PFS grant, SPIF PFS grant. We didn't get the first time. We were very delayed in getting our scoring. So once we got that kind of changed everything, which is for my next tip. But I reached out to Brenda because I knew her organization was successful. Brenda and I have known each other for years. And she gave me like a half an hour of her time just to chat with me about, what sort of direction they went with in the proposal that was maybe different than we went. The last tip that I want to give is never give a scorer an easy way to knock your proposal out. If they've got 40 proposals and they can only fund 15, it's emotionally easier on them if you forgot an attachment, you didn't number your pages right, you didn't include a table of contents, you didn't use the right font or the right margin settings. They can just bump you out and not worry about struggling down the road between you and another great proposal. We had one, and I'm still a little sore about this. It's the same grant that I reached out to Brenda about, where when we got our scoring back, we had the highest level of scoring in every section. And then when it came to our needs assessment, we got like 0 points for it. And I knew we wrote like a killer needs assessment. So I looked at the scoring notes and they noted that we had not clearly cited our source. And I went back and read in our needs assessment, we were using youth survey data to talk about different youth use rates. And in the opening, introductory thing, we said, based on the Hudson County Youth Survey, and we started talking all about this data. And because we didn't later on just keep putting in parentheses the same thing, it was an easy way in a competitive application for a single score. I've never had that happen any other time, but they just completely wiped out our application. Now, it made the rewrite really easy because we didn't have to change anything other than make sure that we, at the end of each sentence, recited the exact same source. But, when you get burned like that once, you learn not to do it again, and just, think of it from the reviewer standpoint. Is there something that maybe could give them an easy way to not have to read the rest of your proposal? If you do that, boom, you could get knocked out right from the beginning.
Thanks, Doug. Brenda.
I hope that was helpful, Doug, that process. I think for me, it would be trust your gut, because, and here's an example. If you have an opportunity that comes out every year, for such as the Drug Free Communities grant, and you have to have certain things in place. If you are not quite, if you're almost there, but not quite, give yourself that extra time. Build your infrastructure first, and then write an honest proposal instead of trying to stretch or fit yourself into something. I've been part of teams where it was my gut feeling that I don't think we were quite ready to apply. It wasn't my call at the time, and we didn't get funded. And I think it was probably the right decision. So for me, it would be, don't try to fit yourself into something that you're not quite ready for yet. Give yourself that time instead and apply when you're ready.
Thanks, Brenda. Amy?
Yeah, I would say, it's disappointing when you invest so much of your time and your energy and yourself and your team into it, and then you don't get the outcome you were hoping for. It's easier said than done, but we've learned that kind of the process in itself is very helpful. It gives you a chance to reflect upon your community story. And for some grants that haven't gone our way, the exercise in itself has provided what we've needed to move ourselves to the next level, if you will, and saving all of that work, because you can then, when the next time comes along, use your copy, paste, and tweak accordingly, as we talked about. But it's not all for nothing, right? And it's a great self-reflective kind of process, I think, that can be like, okay, we didn't show enough need. All right, well, do we need more data? Do we need, what do we need to demonstrate that to the funder? And then the other thing I would just say is that, I know I keep coming back to relationships, but we did have a situation where we applied for a grant, and the feedback we got was, no, this isn't just a great fit, but you have such a strong infrastructure. We are so impressed by that, but this just isn't the right fit. Well, we got a call, a year or so later, we think this is the one you should apply for, because they knew us and we took it, an opportunity and did that. And then they thought of us moving down the road when a better fit came. So again, it's worth something to definitely try for it when you think you're ready and your gut says it's okay, as Brenda alluded to, because good things can happen in the end.
Thank you. I want to just talk briefly about how ECS can support the grant writing process. If people have questions for the panelists while I'm doing that, if you could type them into the chat. I see that our time is coming to an end. It's amazing how fast time flies. So I just want to share that when there's a grant that we're aware of, we, ECS, will provide a content outline. And the content outline includes all that basic information that people need to be aware of that has been alluded to. You don't want to give your reviewer a chance to kick you out by not using the correct font size or the margins. So the content outlines that we produce include all that basic information. It talks, it shares a little bit about the estimated number of pages per section. If something's only worth 10 points out of 100, don't give that a whole lot of page space. You want to spend your pages, you want to use your pages for those parts that are worth 30 points. We can give you an idea of specific content to be covered for each section, suggested language to include, how to use tables and graphs. Many times you can use a smaller font size for your tables and then get more information in the allotted amount of space. We also will go over the review criteria, where the points are, what must be addressed for those points. Some things are pretty simple, some things are more complicated. And in addition to that, we will also score your application if, as Doug talked about, moving backwards from the process. establishing your timeline. I think that's been brought out a couple times. If you give us enough time, we will read your draft and we will score it and then share with you why we gave you that score, so that if you want to then make those changes, you have the opportunity to do that. And we have a pretty good track record with helping organizations get the grants that we review. So I think those content outlines are available. They go whenever we know that there's a grant. We send out a weekly email, and information about that content outline is in there so that you can access it and then use it to your advantage.
I also wanted to jump in here, Marianne, also as well.
Please.
Marianne mentioned that we do send out content outlines, but there is times where we understand that there might be a grant that a client finds and they come to us and ask help to develop a content outline, and that does happen as well. So if there's ever, a grant that you are interested in and you come to us as your evaluator, of course, and ask us for those questions, ask us for that help developing. That's why we're here. So.
Yes, I remember doing one for a Department of Agriculture grant. That was very interesting. So for folks who are looking to support free lunch programs. So there's a lot of different grants out there, and we are happy to help with all of them, basically. I don't know, Jess, did anybody put a question in the chat? Because I wanted to make sure we left a little bit of time. If not, I have another one that I could ask panelists, but I wanted to make sure we left time for individuals in the program.
Yeah, I have not seen any questions come in, so we can kind of leave it open now. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A, whichever's easiest, guys. But yeah, if you want to ask your last question, Marianne.
I'm just wondering, what's the most important thing when you're writing a grant that you're going to make sure happens before that grant goes out the door? One thing, if you had to narrow it down to one thing. It's always hard when you have to narrow something down to one thing. We always have at least three. So let's go for one, but if you got three, you got a minute here. Brenda's smiling, so I'll go with her first.
I wanted to add, utilize the content outline and review that ECS offers. It is so extremely helpful. I'll end up referring to that content outline just as much, if not more, than the actual notice of funding opportunity.
Those content outlines are impressive. We comb through the appendices and those grants, RFPs. It's amazing the amount of information that is put out there to yield a 10-page grant. So let's see, I'll go to Amy next and then Doug.
I would just reiterate the importance of having other pairs of eyes proofread it for you. You're really close to the content, and when you've spent so much time with it, so just checking for punctuation or just any little thing, have another pair of eyes, check it out for sure.
Thank you. And Doug?
Yeah, I would just say make sure you leave time for that final double check on everything. Give it a final read to make sure it makes sense, that it doesn't have typos, make sure that your checklist, all the boxes are checked and it's ready to go. You don't want to give someone an easy way to eliminate your proposal, and you want to feel good about the quality and the time and effort you put into it. If I've probably worked on, out of many proposals, I probably worked on two that were so rushed because they were such a short turnaround and we went for it anyway, that we really didn't get to give it that final, double check and proofread and do those things. And neither of them did we get. And when I read them a month later, I was like, why did we even submit this? So don't put yourself through that level of work without feeling really good and being able to celebrate that your proposal is done and you're proud of the work that you've submitted.
And I would just like to add the importance of submitting in advance. The organization I worked with before ECS, we waited till the last minute to submit. There were computer issues. That was a lot of money that never, the time and energy we spent to develop the grant was wasted, and we didn't get that grant because we did not submit on time. So doing it in advance is helpful. And go ahead, Brenda.
Just one thing that I find helpful too is if you read your proposal out loud, or anything that you write, that's a great editing tool, because you'll catch things that you don't catch when you're reading it silently. And another personal thing that I like to do is once that grant is submitted, I put it away until I get the results. Then I reread it, and it's one of two things. It's with satisfaction, knowing that we were funded, or it's with a more critical eye, looking at the review comments and how we could improve. So give yourself a break and a moment to breathe and celebrate when it's done. And we have grants out there now. We're just waiting to see what happens.
Very good.
And if I could just add, thank your team and thank your partners who helped. Sometimes it's been so much work, and at the end you just want to move on, but take that time to thank your staff. If they were helping you write and put this together, give them an afternoon or a day off for all of their extra hard work, and reach out to those partners that took the time to write you a letter of support or sign an MOU, and thank them. And then whether you get it or not, let them know, follow up and thank them again, whether you receive the grant or you don't.
Thank you. And I'd like to take a moment to thank our panelists for their time, energy, and effort. They have a lot of wisdom, and I am grateful that they were willing to share it with us. I know that I learned something when Doug first talked about Oprah. I remember having to Google that because I was like, what's he talking about? And I never knew that you could gain access to those somebody's proposals. So thank you to everyone. I see Claire thanking us as well. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day. And let us know how we can help you with your grants. Jess,
Thanks,
is there anything
Marianne.
else?
Thank you.
Not really, guys. Just our next webinar that we're going to be having will be on reach tips. Why do I get marked as needs attention? That's coming up next month. I think it's May 5th, I believe. So if that is something you want to get registered for, make sure to go to our website for that. And of course, if you do have any follow-up questions for any of our panelists or us, feel free to let me know, and we can make sure to help get those answered.
Thank you, Jessica.
Nice to see you, Brenda and Amy. Thanks, Marianne and Jessica.
Thank
Awesome.
you,
Thank you, guys.
everyone.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.